Molding a New African. Educating Zambian children was central to evangelical missions. Many missionaries were provoked by the intriguing speeches and writings of David Livingstone, which fueled this emphasis.
But when you look at the way David Livingstone's work laid a strong foundation, you can see that in the humble works of David Livingstone, the gospel in Zambia started to come out because there are many people that were impressed with his work. And I want to briefly talk about Frederick Arnold, a man who grew up in the neighborhood of David Livingstone's family in Scotland. From the time that he was young, he heard of the heroic stories of David Livingstone, and from the age of 14, he started to have this desire that he wanted to come out to Central and Southern Africa and share the gospel following in the footsteps of David Livingstone.
The story concerning the education we enjoy today is far from complete if we ignore the foundation missionaries laid for our country. As a church, we must neither forget or underrate the contribution made by early missionaries. Through their efforts in the face of apathy, limited resources, indifference from existing governors, and often in danger, an educational structure was established, especially in the rural area. One of the first tasks undertaken by Vichari missionary group, which entered the country, was to commit to writing the vernacular language of the area in which they opened up the mission station. The first school in the country was opened by a missionary in 1883. The pioneer's name is Frederick Arnold from the Brethren Missionary.
It must be mentioned that at the turn of the century, 100 years ago and more, slavery was still a factor in Africa, notably within tribal groups, between them, and also much further afield.
Because of the slave trade and other indignities he saw around the African continent, Livingstone was convinced that the promotion of commerce must go hand in hand with Christianity, as it would enable the African people to share some of the benefits of a more developed form of civilization. Western education introduced by missionaries brought with it Western ways of living and prepared the young to embrace critical thinking skills, individual development, and a competitive spirit. The motive for introducing these values was to bring about social and economic change, which contrasted the ways many missionaries solely focused on salvation.
Education that we were introduced to and that I went through introduced me to new ways of seeing the world, new ways of thinking and organizing ideas. I learned to do a bit more abstract thinking, theoretical thinking, and also new ways of using natural resources. I ended up, after David Kaunda, I ended up going to University of London, studying metallurgy and returning to work in the copper mines as an engineer there.
A people of the book. Education enabled Zambians to read the Bible for themselves. This demand fueled the missionaries' desire to translate the Bible into the local language.
Then there was the problem of getting the scriptures into the hands of the people and teaching them to read, especially older folk, so that they could find out the truths of God for themselves. In early days, this was done on a one-to-one basis, with the understanding that when a person had learned to read, they should teach someone else. This was, of course, before universal schooling had been established for all children.
In fact, the Bible was the first book to be written in Zambia's local language, as well as the first textbook and reader in schools. In short, missionaries led the way in putting Zambian languages into writing, and the Bible translations they produced are now classical writings in our languages.
The missionaries that risked their lives to come and bring the gospel at that time realized that in order to establish converts in Christianity, they needed to make real disciples, and they needed to do this by translating the Bible into the local languages that were there at that time. A number of missionaries played a significant role in this work, but Singleton Fisher, my great-uncle, was the one who, after spending more than 40 years in research, completed the translation of the Bible into the Lunda language. Hymns and choruses were also translated into local languages, and he and his wife Kitty lived in Muchacha in DR Congo, just over the border from Sakeji School. My cousin Graham Reed, who is the grandson of Singleton Fisher, actually holds in his hand the very first Lunda Bible that was translated at that time and printed.
Raising freedom fighters. An important but easily ignored fact is that the missionary school laid a vital foundation for the independence struggle and for the independence era itself. Practically all freedom fighters received an education at mission schools.
When David's grandfather was sent across from Livingstonia Mission, there were also Malawian missionaries sent at the same time, and one of them is the late father of our first president, who was David Kaunda, and another of them was Jonathan Nirenda, who worked very closely with David's grandfather. And there was, right from the beginning, close teamwork between the European origin and the African origin missionaries. And in fact, Jonathan Nirenda is buried in the same little graveyard as Malcolm Moffat on the Kalwa farm.
According to Mr. John Manakatwe, one of the first ministers in Kenneth Kaunda's government, the first political party started at Mwenza Mission of the London Mission Society, the society that had actually sent out David Livingstone on his first sensational missionary journey. Manakatwe wrote, and I quote, "The first known political organization in northern Rhodesia, now Zambia, was established at Mwenzo's mission station in Isoka district in northern province, then Muchinga province now," end of quote.
Well-educated Africans who advocated for political action all graduated from Kondowe Mission in Nyasaland. Among them was David Kaunda, the father of Kenneth Kaunda, the first president of Zambia. David Kaunda came to Zambia from Malawi as a missionary sponsored by the Church of Scotland. He was stationed at Luba Mission in Chinsali and brought both the gospel and education to the area. This, of course, means that Dr. Kenneth Kaunda himself was raised at a mission station.
As a nation, we have to capture stories of men and women whose dreams, passion, bravery, and intelligence was founded at mission schools. There is no way you can talk about men like Mbiku Stalewanika, the founding president of the African Congress, and Mr. Lawrence Jolakatirungu, the first president of the African Mine Workers Union, without talking about the education that they received from missionary schools. The education that broadened their resolve for self-rule in this nation.
A foundation for modern education. Preceding independence, Christian missions led the way in educating African children. By 1925, according to available records, enrollment in mission schools had already reached 100,000. On the other hand, the colonial government concentrated on educating white settler children. This disparity in education triggered an active response by frustrated missionaries. Educating mothers of the land. The education missionaries provided was not restricted to males. Missionary schools such as Chipembe, Mukinje, and Jase Girls Schools were established to provide secondary education to upcoming mothers and female professionals. The reputation of these missionary girls' schools is a beautiful song in the ears of those who advocate for educating the girl child today.
My dad was a very open-hearted man. He gave and he gave and he helped. But I think it's all became because of what they taught in the mission school. And having gone to school, he used to tell me, "Oh, I went to school with the older brother of the president," that by then he was the president, Kenneth Kaunda, and would feel quite encouraged to know that he had gone to a school and he learned what he learned. And so for us, for me and my sisters, we were very privileged because in the time that girls were not considered to be going to school, he told us, no, You must go to school. You must read the scriptures and you must study and make yourselves able to stand in the world and contribute. So he gave us very good counsel on loving the Bible, loving God, and also loving education. I think I have gotten all this education because I constantly hear the voice of God, my Father in heaven and my Father on earth. Go for it. I'll go with you.
Raising a force of Christian professionals. At independence, Zambia had less than 100 college degree holders. This predicament would have been dire had not a team of teachers, clerks, nurses, tradesmen, and civil servants emerged from the mission schools. This took a new turn with the arrival of expatriate Christian teachers in government schools and colleges. They came with the desire to create a legacy of faith among the rising professionals in the new Zambia.
Dr. Kaunda wanted schools started in all the districts, and in the initial period there were very few Zambian teachers. So they recruited widely from overseas. And a lot of those young people who came out to teach, if I go back a step, they attracted them by offering them a postgraduate certificate in education at the University of Zambia, and then they were obliged to teach for at least 2 years in one of the rural schools. And so a lot of these young people came out, mainly from Britain, but also from Holland and so on, and a lot of them were Christians. And they had a great impact on those early schools. I should think almost every one of those schools, Bukushi and Pika and so on, were staff, had amongst their staff some of these young people who were Christians. and they were very keen to get Scripture Union started, and they were the key people in all over the country, in Western Province, Southern Province, right across the country. There were these young, keen Christian teachers.
Outside the classroom, expatriate teachers instigated the rise of evangelical student movements. Some of these movements include Scripture Union pouring themselves into secondary schools, Zambia Fellowship of Evangelical Students spread into colleges and trade institutes, and Nurses Christian Fellowship leading the charge among trainee nurses and midwives. The Christian School in the Third Republic. As we approached the Third Republic, we observed another twist in Christ-centered general education. We saw a vast number of Christian schools, colleges, and universities owned and run by indigenous Zambian Christians.
Let's talk about the Theological College of Central Africa. It's just over 30 years old, and you can see the coincidence. That takes us back to the revival days of our time, in the late 70s and early 80s. And once again, the church leaders recognized that people could be able to lead churches, but they needed equipping. And this equipping needed to be done systematically, it needed to be done professionally. So the establishment of a college like the Theological College of Central Africa was both to provide academic training and also ministerial development and training.
Churches also began to establish community schools. Other schools were run by local Christians of European descent. Chengelo Imukushi and Amano Nia Chingola are a couple of examples among many. The vision of Fred Arnott continues in a new way. The challenge in educating is to maintain a balance between Christianity, traditional values, and modern systems. One unique school is Grace Academy, sponsored by Canadian Christians. This is the only school in Zambia offering vulnerable children an education from nursery to 12th grade at international standards free of charge. A number of institutions educate at tertiary level within a biblical worldview. Two examples are Northrise University in Ndola and Creso University in Lusaka. Ndola hosts Mechanics for Africa, sponsored by British Christians, which gears its offering in auto mechanics towards orphaned young men and women. Down the same Monkey Fountain Zoo Road is Mobile Mission Maintenance, sponsored by Australian Christians. This focuses on building trades of bricklaying and carpentry. However, the influence of the Christian educator in a government institution cannot be underrated. Dr. Drina benefited from an expatriate Christian professor, at the University of Zambia and returned to distinguish herself as lecturer in the same institution.
There are great things she's done in nutrition. For example, which for me as a husband, which I see, she's been a promoter for the Food Science Technology Department. That was an achievement, great achievement for this land, to be able to preserve our foods and whatever. And then also as a promoter of the Human Nutrition Department, because before there was only diploma level. But in those areas, I give it to her. But those are great contributions, including PAM.
In Zambia, our development has been good in certain areas, but in certain areas, there have been no spearheading of certain programs like the nutrition program. People have cried, those who were nutritionists, to become PhDs in nutrition, but they could never be because those programs were not there. But now that they are there, let's take them with strength and let's maximize their, interaction with other programs that are helping Zambia to become a great nation.
More must be done to marry the values of our society in a manner that does not conflict with the Bible or undermine the modern world. The opposite also stands. Modern education kills the African if it tramples on the spiritual values of the Bible and the harmony of our traditional culture. We cannot say that Western education, even that which was brought by missionaries, had no faults. Overall, education promoted by missionaries and Christian educators has played a leading role in the growth of our distinguished nation.